Did you know the very first Formula 1 games didn't even have real drivers or real teams, not even real tracks? But nowadays, these video games have evolved into something so realistic, so detailed, that real F1 drivers use them to practice between races.
But the best improvement on this, genuinely, is the handling. The handling is a lot more accurate, a lot more controllable.
And I want to tell you about them, because this isn't just a story of a video game franchise. It's the story of how Formula 1 became playable and how millions of fans, me included, got behind the wheel, at least virtually. From clunky arcade cabinets with 2D pixels to today's ultra-immersive racing simulators with cinematic storylines and photorealistic graphics, Formula 1 games have transformed how fans experience the sport. But it wasn't always a straight line. There were stumbles, glitches, studio shutdowns, and yet with every iteration, the games got faster, better, and more immersive. And the only place to start is at the very beginning. You see, long before the turbocharged V10 era, or even the glory days of Prost and Senna, racing games were nothing more than just a few squares on a screen. Arcade cabinets like Tato's Speed Race or Atari's Grand 10 are hardly recognizable as video games today. I mean, it's no surprise considering they came out in the 1970s. But it wouldn't be until 1982, with the release of Pole Position during the peak of arcade gaming, that Namco would change the virtual racing world forever. Now, Pole Position wasn't an official F1 game. There were no real teams, no real drivers, and honestly, you could count the number of pixels on one hand, if you had a lot of extra fingers, that is. But jokes aside, it was the first game that somewhat captured the feel of Formula 1. It even used a replica of Fuji Speedway, giving players their first taste of a real-world racetrack. The graphics were crude, the sounds were beeps and buzzes, and yet for the time, Pole Position was a revelation. Not only was it the first game to be based on a real racing circuit, it also featured impressive physics for the time and even pseudo 3D graphics. It was fast, addictive, and brutally hard. But here's the thing, it didn't matter that it wasn't officially licensed by the FIA, gamers didn't care. For the first time, they could feel the tension of overtaking at 200 kilometers an hour, even if they were standing in an arcade with a joystick and a coin slot. Pole Position became one of the highest grossing arcade games of its era. It spawned sequels, clones, and inspired a whole generation of game developers. But the demand for more realism, for actual Formula 1, was growing. By the end of the decade, developers were starting to push boundaries. They wanted more than just speed, they wanted authenticity. And that's where the chaos of the 90s would take the wheel, pun intended. By the turn of the decade, gaming had started to shift away from arcades and entered the living room. Sega, Nintendo, PlayStation, and of course the PC. But with that change, Formula 1 had a new problem. Everyone wanted to make an F1 game, but not everyone could. This was the decade of licenses. Some studios had rights to teams, others had rights to drivers, some had access to tracks but not engines. It was a complete licensing nightmare, and as a result, the games of the 90s were inconsistent, chaotic, and weirdly charming. Take Formula 1 Built to Win for the NES. It was more of a hybrid between RPG and racing sim. You started off in a basic car and worked your way up through races, sponsors and upgrades, eventually reaching the top of the motorsport pyramid. It was clunky, the graphics were rough, but the ambition, massive. And on the PC side of things, 1991 saw the release of F1 GP by legendary developer Jeff Crammond, which was one of the first games to focus more on car physics and accuracy rather than the fun and more arcade-style games like Grand Prix Circuit or Virtua Formula. And despite the name, it wasn't actually an official F1 game. But the real turning point came when the FIA started attaching some of the biggest names in racing to these games, like Ayrton Senna's Super Monaco GP or Nigel Mansell's World Championship Racing, which were among the best-selling arcade games of their era. Mansell's was particularly impressive. I mean, he was a huge star at the time. A reigning world champion with an iconic mustache and fearless driving style, his game featured real tracks, his Williams FW14B, and an actual championship mode. But there was a problem. It didn't include any other playable drivers, just Mansell, racing against the same enemy sprites in slightly different coloured cars. Still, it was a hit, and it opened the door for more personalised F1 games. So, publishers got bolder. By 1995, Psygnosis, a British studio famous for futuristic racing games like Wipeout, acquired the official FIA license to produce Formula 1 games, and they didn't mess around. Their first title, simply called Formula 1, was a game changer, literally. Released on the original PlayStation, it featured all 17 tracks, real drivers, real teams, and an actual television-style broadcast presentation. Murray Walker, the legendary voice of F1, even did the commentary. For fans of the sport, it was a dream come true, but the handling was brutal. Cars felt heavy, crashes were frequent, and if you took Eau Rouge flat, you were either a god or you were airborne. And thank God Lance Stroll wasn't a player driver in this one. Still, the game sold millions, becoming one of the best-selling racing titles on PlayStation. But Psygnosis wasn't done. They kept releasing annual titles, each one improving on the last with better graphics, AI and gameplay. By the end of the 90s, Formula 1 had finally found its digital voice. The games were authentic, the soundtracks were adrenaline pumping, and the fans hooked. But the next decade would bring a whole new kind of race, not just on the track but behind the scenes, because the 2000s were about to be dominated by two names, EA Sports and Jeff Crammond. As Formula 1 entered a new millennium filled with V10s, groove tyres and Schumacher domination, its video game counterpart was about to split into two very different directions. On one side, you had the simulation purists, players who wanted every gear change, tyre compound and aerodynamic tweak to be accounted for. On the other, casual fans who just wanted to hit the throttle and feel the speed without worrying about telemetry or tyre wear. This era was defined by a battle between two giants, EA Sports and Jeff Crammond. Let's start with EA Sports.
EA Sports. It's in the game.
In 2000, EA entered the F1 scene with the release of F1 2000. With their now iconic "It's in the game" slogan, EA brought their usual polish and presentation, slick menus, licensed teams, real drivers and flashy visuals. The game leaned heavily into accessibility. It had driving assists, arcade-style physics, and even dynamic weather. It was the kind of F1 experience you could pick up and enjoy with zero racing knowledge. But for the hardcore fans, it wasn't enough. The physics were floaty, car setups were shallow, and the AI, let's just say brake checking into turn 1, became an art form. If you were a true sim racer in the early 2000s, chances are you worshipped at the altar of one game, Grand Prix 4. Developed by Micro Prose and released in 2002, GP4 wasn't just a game, it was a simulator in every sense of the word. Every race weekend felt like a real event. You had full practice, qualifying, race strategy, realistic car behavior, and even weather systems that affected grip and visibility in believable ways. The attention to detail was borderline obsessive. Jeff Crammond, a programmer and physicist by training, poured his soul into the GP series. He cared more about realism than mass appeal. And for a certain kind of F1 fan, that was everything. Grand Prix 4 didn't have the accessibility or the bankroll of EA's games. The UI was basic, the sound design was average, but when it came to the driving mode, nothing could touch it. You felt every bump, every twitch of oversteer, every slight drop of revs under braking. But despite the cult following, GP4 never got a proper sequel. Licensing issues, changing publisher priorities, and growing cost of sim development pushed the series into hibernation. So, EA had the stage to themselves for a few years. They released annual F1 games, F1 2001, F1 2002, and even experimented with a spin-off series called F1 Career Challenge. And while they were fun, they all shared a sense of being iterative. More of the same year after year, no major breakthroughs, but hey, at least EA isn't known for that nowadays, right? Right? I'm kidding of course, but EA's dominance didn't last for long. Because in 2003, Sony swooped in with an exclusive deal to publish F1 games for their PlayStation platforms. This effectively froze out other competitors. Their Formula 1 series, developed by the remnants of Psygnosis, carried the torch through the mid-2000s. These games were beautiful for the time, especially F1 2006 on the PS2. They offered full seasons, career modes, and improved physics. But again, the focus leaned more on accessibility rather than deep simulation. The hardcore sim crowd had to look elsewhere, often modding older PC games or shifting to titles like R Factor and GTR. By the end of the decade, F1 games had hit a crossroads. On console, they were fun but lacked depth. On PC, they were deep but often clunky and inaccessible. Fans wanted something that combined the best of both worlds. And in 2009, after years of silence, our prayers would finally be answered. Known for their work on the Toka and Colin McRae Rally series, Codemasters had built a reputation for delivering deeply satisfying driving physics without sacrificing playability. In 2008, they secured the official Formula One license, and the hopes of millions of F1 gaming fans shifted toward a single question: could Codemasters finally build the perfect blend of sim and spectacle? The first glimpse came in 2009, but only for the Nintendo Wii and PSP. These were low-risk entries, more arcade than authentic, fun but hardly groundbreaking. But then came 2010. F1 2010 marked Codemasters' real debut on PC, Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, and it was an absolute game changer. Visually, it was stunning. Rain beaded on visors, water pooled on curbs, and the lighting brought circuits like Spa and Singapore to life in breathtaking detail. But it wasn't just a graphics overhaul. Codemasters introduced a feature that would become legendary: dynamic weather. It wasn't just cosmetic. Rain could arrive mid-race, turning a dry one-stop strategy into chaos. Puddles formed in low spots. Dry lines emerged as the pack passed over the wet circuit. Suddenly, every lap was unpredictable. Yet, for all its atmosphere, F1 2010 wasn't quite a full sim. Hardcore fans noted strange tyre behaviour, robotic AI, and physics that didn't quite match the standards set by modded PC sims like R-Factor or iRacing. But Codemasters had something else: momentum and a plan. So they doubled down. F1 2011 through 2014 brought incremental improvements, better car handling, more realistic penalties, and refined AI. But it was in 2016 that things truly began to click. You see, F1 2016 introduced a full career mode, complete with team rivalries, practice programs, R&D upgrades, and even press interviews. Players didn't just race anymore, they lived the F1 life. You join a team like Renault or Force India and slowly build your car's performance over multiple seasons. It created emotional investment. You weren't just fighting for wins, you were developing a legacy. But Codemasters didn't stop there. F1 2017 and 2018 added classic cars, allowing players to relive the glory days of McLaren Hondas and V10 Ferraris. The handling model became more refined. AI was aggressive but fair. Time management and ERS deployment became strategic elements. Then, F1 2019 brought the biggest innovation the series had seen in a long time: an actual narrative. While it wasn't quite a full-on story mode, which came a few years later, you weren't just a name on a leaderboard anymore. You had an actual rival, Devin Butler, and a backstory that began in Formula 2. It was like Drive to Survive, but interactive. And the following year saw the release of the most ambitious entry yet. F1 2020 added My Team mode, letting players become both driver and team principal. You'd hire staff, negotiate sponsors, and choose your power unit supplier. It gave players total control, and it worked, finally giving us a way to create our own F1 stories from scratch. And all of these entries existed within a broader racing world. While Codemasters refined their F1 offering, hardcore sim racers were still logging hours in Assetto Corsa, R-Factor 2 and iRacing, pushing the envelope on realism, laser scan tracks, and modding freedom. Codemasters wisely started paying attention. But just as they were gaining momentum, the world changed. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic halted real-life racing. F1 drivers like George Russell, Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc turned to the virtual paddock. Twitch streams exploded. Virtual Grand Prix drew millions of viewers. Suddenly, F1 games weren't just entertainment, they were the sport itself. With real-life racing halted, F1 launched the Virtual GP series, which absolutely exploded in popularity, even having real-life celebrities participating in events. But it wasn't just about laughs and celebrity cameos. These events brought F1 esports into the spotlight. Professional teams, Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari, began assembling dedicated esports divisions. Full-time sim racers, trained with the same focus as their real-life counterparts, began competing in high-stakes championships with six-figure prize pools. But the esports wave created a new challenge: realism. Suddenly, frame rates, input latency, and force feedback weren't niche concerns, they were deal breakers. Players demanded hyper-accurate physics, photorealistic visuals, and perfect telemetry feedback. Codemasters and other developers had to evolve quickly. But just when the future of F1 games seemed to be set in stone, in came a shocking announcement that changed the virtual racing world forever. EA, the gaming behemoth behind FIFA, Madden and countless other titles, had acquired Codemasters. And fans were definitely divided. On one hand, EA had the budget, resources and global reach to elevate F1 gaming to new heights. On the other, well, EA had a reputation, microtransactions, aggressive monetization, and annualized releases, all concerns that made hardcore racing fans nervous. But the first true EA-branded title, F1 21, arrived with relatively positive fanfare. The real draw was Breaking Point, the first full-fledged story mode, complete with cutscenes, rivalries, and scripted drama. Some called it the drive to survive of video games. It wasn't perfect, but it broadened the audience and proved EA wasn't afraid to let Codemasters take creative risks. But at the same time, rival platforms were emerging. iRacing and rFactor 2 offered ultra-realistic driving experiences, drawing in sim purists and even F1 test drivers for practice laps. While they lacked the official F1 branding, their physics engine set a new bar, and EA seemingly took notice. With F1 22 and 23, the series began pushing further into realism. The tyre model became more dynamic, curb behaviour felt weightier, DRS and ERS deployment had to be timed with surgical precision. And for the first time, players could experience VR support, putting them directly inside the cockpit, complete with the rumble of the car and the blur of 200 miles per hour straights. But realism came with a price. New players struggled, the skill ceiling rose dramatically, multiplayer became ruthless, and critics began asking, was the game still fun? To bridge the gap, Codemasters introduced F1 Life, a lifestyle hub with custom clothing, supercars, and flashy apartments. It was an attempt to capture the drive to survive audience, blending racing with luxury and personality. Some loved it, others saw it as fluff. But one thing was clear, Formula 1 gaming was no longer just about racing. It was about immersion, identity, and storytelling. As esports continued to grow, the line between game and sport kept fading. The best sim racers could transition into real-world racing programs. The fastest laps in F1 esports became benchmarks for professional drivers. And I just want to really quickly mention the arrival of F1 Manager in 2022, which offered players a brand new way to approach Formula 1 gaming.
Negative. Stay out. This is the formation lap. We cannot work on the car. There is no reason to come in. Do not box. Negative box.
You see, the developers, Frontier, introduced a new era of strategic depth, allowing players to step into the shoes of a team principal, hiring engineers, balancing budgets, and executing race strategies down to the millisecond. Think of it like Football Manager compared to FIFA. Anyways, the last few years of F1 games have seen some up and downs. F1 23, which saw the return of Breaking Point, was pretty well received, with refined handling, which was more forgiving but still rewarding. Red flags were reintroduced as well, and a new safety rating system improved multiplayer quality. F1 Life was upgraded to F1 World, if you're into role-playing as an F1 driver outside the grid. But perhaps most importantly, EA, for the most part, restrained themselves from the worst monetization practices. There were cosmetics, yes, but no pay-to-win mechanics, thankfully. And for future F1 titles, we all have to wonder, will EA double down on esports and realism? Will they lean into storytelling and spectacle? Or will they risk diluting the purity of the franchise in pursuit of broader appeal? But regardless of the answer, one truth had become undeniable. F1 games have transformed so much throughout the years, and I personally can't wait to see where the future takes us. The genre is no longer a one-size-fits-all experience. Whether you're a casual fan, a hardcore sim racer, or a numbers-obsessed strategist, there's now an F1 game tailored to your passion. And the hardware, that's about to level up too. With next-gen consoles and PC hardware constantly improving, expect faster load times, richer textures, more dynamic lighting, and deeper AI learning. We could see races where AI drivers have persistent memories, holding grudges from past collisions, or recognizing your overtaking style and adapting in real time. VR and AR will likely take center stage. Current VR support is just the beginning. In the future, fans could experience full 360-degree garage interactions, real-time engineering briefings, or even walk the paddock in a virtual race weekend. But perhaps the most exciting and controversial development lies in player agency. Will we get an open-world F1 game? One where you live the full lifestyle, from driver press conferences and training to behind-the-scene politics and sponsor negotiations. A sort of F1 RPG, where your choices impact your career path and relationships with rival drivers. That's the dream, and EA, with its experience in immersive storytelling and massive production budgets, might be the only studio bold enough to try it. The future of F1 gaming is a balancing act. It must respect its roots, the sound of the engine, the feel of the tyre on the asphalt, the dance between apex and throttle. But it must also innovate, embrace storytelling, community, and technology to keep fans engaged in an increasingly saturated gaming market. Because ultimately, Formula 1 games aren't just entertainment anymore. They're how many people fall in love with the sport. They're the on-ramp, and the next generation of fans, the ones who will buy tickets, wear team merch, and maybe even become drivers, will not just come from Silverstone or Spa, but from their screens. Now, this has been the entire history and evolution of Formula 1 video games. Thanks so much for watching until the end. Make sure to like and subscribe for even more F1 content.